All good. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to a live YouTube live here in Thurles. You're very, very welcome, and I can probably understand people's excitement at being at home on a day like today. If you're in Ireland, as it's raining, windy and blustery. So I hope that this session that we do today will make your afternoon just a little bit more enjoyable and a little bit more educational. As you can see, again, we're taking all our precautions in terms of mitigating any COVID risk, and we hope that you're all doing the same and staying safe. Okay, so just a little bit around what we'll be doing today. So we're going to look at some of the more advanced topics of resistance training. So we're going to look at accommodating resistance or variable resistance, known as the same thing. That will encompass the looking at bands and looking at chains as methods of increasing and changing the load through a lift. Okay, that'll be our main first session. We look at the setup of those, how we would measure the weight, and how we calculate at any given time what an athlete is lifting. Okay. For our second session, what we'll do, we'll take 5 minutes for a bit of a refreshment. And then we're going to come back in and we're going to look at the use of tourniquets for blood flow resistance training. Okay, so we're going to look at wrapping tourniquets around the upper arm and around the upper leg in order to see the effects of using those. Okay, so I hope that you're engaging. We have our chat box, so make sure that any questions that you have, that you pop them into that. We can see them here to the side, so every so often we'll check that, and hopefully if you've any questions, we can answer them as live as possible. Okay, we have Maggie here today with us, just off camera, so she's going to be popping in and out, and she's going to be our elite athlete for the day. So we'll get going. So when we talk about accommodating resistance and variable resistance, we talk about changing the load that an athlete is experiencing throughout the lift. We talk about using chains and bands so that when an athlete lifts a barbell, for example, the load changes throughout the lift. In the case of the bands, it is increased tension on the elasticity of the band. In the case of the chains, it is more chains off of the floor and suspended and under load for the athlete. So when we look at the two of those, there's a few things, a few prerequisites that we must know as coaches as to why we would use these in the first place. We must know the proper application for these and when is a good time, or maybe perhaps not a very good time to use them. One of the main prerequisites when we talk about bands and chains and any kind of variable resistance is strength curves. So when we look at strength curves, initially strength curves in your studies might seem quite arbitrary, not fulfilling much need to know, whereas when it comes to bands and chains, they're essential. We need to know the stimulus that we're placing our athletes and our clients under. We need to know what they're experiencing. Now, I'm really disappointed today that you're not here, because at the live workshops, and in particular our bands and chains workshop like we're doing today, I always encourage our students to get underneath the bar. Okay, so that's a saying or a phrase that you'll often hear throughout the world of fitness and strength and conditioning, is how many years of experience does a person have underneath the bar. So in our live workshops, I'm imploring people always to get underneath the bar and feel what it's like with chains or with bands or with any other exercise for that matter. Okay, so if you have in your gym, if it's a home gym, fantastic. If it's not, don't worry about it. If you have bands, if you have chains, try and use them. Try and feel the stimulus that you're hoping to be placing your athletes and your clients under. It's really important that you feel it, okay? So even when we were just setting up the bands previously, and we were getting an idea for the load, we experienced one or two small minor errors that most people forget or don't know about when they're lifting a bar with bands or chains on. And that's that the load becomes live straight away, okay? The load is ever changing. So when we look at our strength curves, we must know that. We must know what our clients and our athletes are experiencing. So with our strength curves, we have three main types of strength curves, okay? One which we'll look at is more common than most, and that's our ascending strength curve. That's when our sticking point occurs close to the start of the lift, okay? So close to when we're lifting the weight in a concentric manner. The early part of that concentric lift is when the most weight is more challenging, okay? And the sticking point occurs closer to that. We also have our descending strength curve where the sticking point occurs closer to the end. And a classic example of that would be a chin-up. When you pull in a chin-up, it gets harder and harder and harder, and oftentimes the sticking point for most people occurs towards the very top, okay, of getting the chin up. We have also a parabolic strength curve where the sticking point occurs somewhere towards the middle of the exercise. And this is, quite, dependent on the person, dependent on the athlete and the individual as to where they feel it. Because everybody has different levels of strength, and something that you will learn as well, or if you have learned already, is that strength is really individual and really specific to angles, to people, to joints, to levers. When we talk about levers and angles, we talk about arms and legs, etc. So when we look at we're going to demonstrate using back squats today. So when we look at a back squat is an ascending strength curve exercise. The sticking point occurs close to, at the hardest part, rather, at the start of the lift, okay? Oftentimes it can be towards the middle, and oftentimes it can be at the end, depending on the person. However, when we're in a back squat, when we go down to our lowest position, that's when we're most under load, that's when we're most vulnerable for the load, okay? When we look at applying bands and chains to a back squat, what we see is that when we descend into the squat, the load lessens, okay? And we'll see that practically now in a second. We see that when the squat, when Maggie goes into a squat, down into a deep squat like she will, the chain will unravel onto the floor, and we're going to be able to measure what load she's under at both the low point, but also at the high point. One of the main benefits, and we'll reiterate again after we see some examples in a second, of using bands and chains, and I want this to be at the forefront of your mind when you do it, is what is this athlete experiencing right now? How does it feel? But also, why as a coach would we choose bands and chains? Why would we choose to use them over just traditional plates, dumbbells as main lifts? So one of the things with the chains is that when we ascend, or with the bands is as we ascend, the load increases or it varies. So that's where the variable resistance term comes in. So when we increase or go up in our concentric portion of our lift, and as the weight increases, it forces the athlete to keep momentum or acceleration moving through the exercise. So often in an exercise do athletes slow down as soon as they get past the sticking point. However, what we're doing with the bands and the chains is we're raising the sticking point of the lift. So as Maggie will come out of the lift now in a second, the exercise is going to get harder and harder and harder. Therefore, her nervous system, her muscular system, will have to stay firing really rapidly, really hard to ensure that she gets and completes the exercise. Okay, I think we need a practical demonstration, Maggie. That's enough of me talking. So Maggie's going to come in. We're going to use the chains first, okay? We have our collars on each side. So Maggie's just going to get into a back squat position, nice and solid, and be really aware. She's going to be really aware of just lifting the bar up first, okay? Because as soon as she's up and the chains are suspended, this weight now is live, okay? It's moving, all right? So Maggie, nice and smooth. I want you to do 3 squats for us. Good, just do 1 more. And we can walk it back in. Perfect. And we can stay around there now, Maggie, because we'll be doing another few sets. Maggie's getting her session in for today, okay? So she's all good. So what we seen there was the chains, on the bottom side towards the floor, unravel onto the floor, okay? How many links of the chain fell onto the floor? is something, you know, we didn't pay attention to. It wasn't where our coaching eye was at on that one, okay? But we're going to look at that now in the next set that Maggie does. So the reason why that's important is we want to know the load of what Maggie is lifting, okay? So we measured just before, and we came on, is that each chain weighs 20 kilos, okay? So there's 20 kilos on this chain, there's 20 kilos on that chain, total. There's 20 links on the chain. So that means that each link of the chain is 1 kilo, okay? This is a 20 kilo barbell. So we can, just by calculation and addition, we can calculate that the links of the chain that Maggie is lifting, we can count them. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We count this one, 15. And if that's the same on the other side, that's 30 links, so that's 30 kilos. Plus the bar would be 50 kilos. Now when Maggie stands up, we'll count and see how many links come off the floor as she stands up with the bar at the top position, okay? So Maggie, if we just stand with the bar, I want you to try and pay close attention to how many links come off the floor when Maggie lifts up. So it's currently at 15. Okay, so hold there now, Maggie. So only one link is suspended on this side, which I can assume is only one link on that side as well. So that's gone up to 16 links on both sides. So that's up to 32 kilos now, plus the 20 kilo bar is 52 kilos. So this is the max load that Maggie's lifting. And the reason why that's important is because what we don't want to do is put plates on and exceed Maggie's 1 rep max. So what we don't want to do is have the athlete be placed under 110% of her 1 rep max, because that's impossible for Maggie to do just at this moment in time. So we don't want to overload the athlete. So Maggie will do a couple of nice slow squats. Again, you at home, I want you to be paying attention to how many links of the chain curl up onto the floor as Maggie descends into the squat. Okay. And back up. Go one more. And we can rack it back in. Great stuff. Okay. So I'm going to keep my finger on this link, okay? Because when Maggie was going down into the squat, what I seen was that this was the last link suspended, okay? So I kept my eye on that as the coach, so I know that at the bottom, by addition, I'll be able to know what Maggie was experiencing at the bottom. So at the top we said it was 52, right? Yep. So if we count these links, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We won't count that one because that's kind of on the floor. So that's 5 on this side and 5 on that side. So that's 10 kilos. So from the top position to the bottom position, Maggie experienced a change of 10 kilos, okay? So in a graduated order. So at the bottom, the weight that she was lifting was about 42 kilos, okay? And that's just important for us to know now, that when we apply load, either in more load in terms of plates, or if we lift Maggie up onto like a step on a box, so that she's raised up and more links come off of the floor, again, we know what she's experiencing. We know that when we get in under the bar, that there's only a certain amount of links that she's capable of lifting, okay? So that's great. This time now, Maggie, what we're going to work on is intent, okay? So when we use bands and chains, we always look at aspects of speed and power as being our main physiological goal when we want to get out of lifting, okay? So if we're lifting to get stronger, ultimately we're lifting to become more powerful for sport. If we're using bands and chains, ultimately we're lifting to increase our acceleration ability throughout an exercise, okay? And that's a really important line that I just said for what we're talking about today. We use bands and chains to increase our acceleration ability throughout a lift or throughout an exercise, okay? So what Maggie's going to do the next time, I know that Maggie, was that an easy lift? Yeah. I could see that was okay for Maggie. Maggie wasn't it wasn't equivalent to her 1 rep max. So we figured out before we came on again that Maggie's 1 rep max is about 70 to 80 kilos, okay? She was modest, she said it was lower. I know it's higher, okay? So her lifting 52 kilos is quite safe. So now we can work on aspects of power. So we can work on increasing the rate of force development and the rate of speed that Maggie goes through the concentric portion, because I want her to accelerate really hard under ever increasing load from the chain, okay? So Maggie, we're going to go back in. So on the concentric portion, so when we're coming up, I want us to really drive up, okay? Really drive up as if we're trying to jump off the floor, but don't jump. Everything but the jump, okay? Good. Good, let's do 2 more. Good, last one. Good, and we can walk it back in. Great stuff. Excellent. Okay, so what you should have seen was a marked difference in the speed at which Maggie was going through the concentric portion of the lift, okay? When we're using bands and chains, I would always encourage athletes to drop down into the bottom position, whether if it's a bench press, a squat, a deadlift, whatever exercise it may be. I would always encourage them to lower into the eccentric portion with caution, with a slower tempo, and then come out of it quicker, okay? The reason being so is because as you drop, the chain can waver from side to side. We'll see that a little bit more when we use the band, and the elastic resistance adds a lot of life to the band so that the bar can kind of go from side to side and it can disturb the lift. So always go into the eccentric part of the exercise just nice and smooth without any speed, okay? So Maggie did that exercise really well. She drove through the concentric portion of the exercise. Again, we know what she's experiencing because we counted it in a couple of her warm-up sets. So she went from 42 to 52 kilos and she was moving quickly all of the time, okay? So that's our chains. I want to talk a little bit about, we'll come to our bands now in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about why would we use chains, okay? So we know that we would use them for acceleration purposes throughout the exercise. We would use bands as a tool to increase our acceleration throughout, say, a squat like we did, or a deadlift, or a bench press, okay? But we can also use these for different methods like potentiation, okay? So we can use bands and chains to potentiate our nervous system for higher efforts, subsequent higher efforts. Such examples would be when you're doing a 1 rep max lift day, okay? So if you were doing a back squatted 1 rep max, or a deadlift, or a bench press, you might start off with a couple of warm-up sets, but you might add in a couple of sets with a band or a chain, just to try and drive a little bit more acceleration into the latter part of your lift, okay? Especially on those ascending strength curve exercises like your bench press, like your back squat, okay? So you could use that for, accelerating through the whole entirety of the lift, okay? You could use it for potentiating prior to an acceleration or a sprint session or a couple of sprints, whatever it is that you may do. You can 100% do it for before like a plyometric-based circuit or a plyometric-based session, whereby you need to, again, excite that nervous system to a higher degree versus just your regular, say, ramp warm-up, okay? The P and the ramp could be use of bands and chains. Okay, so we figured out how much load Maggie is under with the chains, okay? And we did that with a very kind of, I suppose, a very simple addition minus formula. When it comes to the use of bands, it's a little bit different because the band, obviously, as it stretches, we don't know what is the exact load at that moment in time, okay? But we can make a pretty good guess. And we're going to go through it over here now, Maggie, okay? So we're going to move over to our second rack. So what we have in this rack is, again, we use a back squat, barbell. We have 2 really heavy dumbbells, and we have 2 black bands of equal strength on both sides attached onto the barbell. okay? One small safety point is that the band goes just inside of the barbell, attached to the point that you will be holding, okay? So when we put the band onto the outside, the bar can spin and turn a little bit more and it has more life, okay? So we just want to put it on the inside of the bar, okay? We also have a weighing scales right in the middle of the platform, okay? So as I said, it's hard to know what weight the bands are at max and minimum tension of the exercise, so at the top of the squat and at the bottom. I can make a pretty good guess right now and say that at the bottom, the tension is going to be pretty much nothing except the barbell, because the band will go so slack, it won't have any effect on the bar, okay? We're just going to look at the max tension for now. So, Maggie, what you're going to do is you're going to go in under, okay? You're just going to get your own body weight first, okay? So, just stand on the scale first without the bar. So we need to know the athlete's body weight, because when the athlete is holding the bar, we need to know what we need to subtract from the bar and from the body weight to get the band, okay? So it's kind of like 3 different points. Okay, 56. So we have 56 kilos. So now, Maggie, what you're going to do is you're going to get the bar into a back squat position and then step back onto the scale. So we know the barbell is 20 kilos, so that should bring us up to 76 kilos. So okay, so the scale now is reading nearly 86 kilos, okay? We'll call it 86. So Maggie, we can put the bar back in. So we know that Maggie's body weight was 56. The bar is 20 kilos, that would have made it 76. And then with the bar, Maggie and the bands, it read at 86. So we know that at the very top, these bands each we're adding 5 kilos of resistance at the top, okay? That's not a huge amount of weight. When you say it like that, that's not a huge amount of weight initially when you say, 5 kilos each side. However, it has a huge effect using an elastic band on the eccentric part of the lift, okay? So whatever about coming up, you're going to be fighting against that ever-increasing resistance from, say, 0 kilos up to 10 kilos, so 5 each side. So you're going to have to move through that range. But also, it's worth pointing out that as soon as Maggie starts to descend, because the band and the elasticity of the band always wants to go back to its original shape, as soon as Maggie goes into her eccentric, she's going to have a heavier eccentric as well, okay? So that eccentric lowering of the squat is going to be a little bit more lively than, say, a regular squat without the bands. So, right. So Maggie, we're going to take the scale away now. We know that it's 5 kilos on each side. So we're just going to set up for a back squat. I want you to go into just a half squat first, okay? Before we go into any kind of a deep squat. So just do a couple of half reps. That's it, and then back up. Good. That's it, and back up. And you can walk the bar back in then, just nice and slowly. Great. Super. And again, we just make sure all safety is all good. So the reason that I asked Maggie to do a kind of 3 partial or half reps is because, one, I wanted the athlete to experience what the bands felt like. I just wanted them to get to know how the bands feel, and if there was any kind of alterations that they need to make before they go into a heavier or more powerful explosive type exercise. The other thing I wanted to see is just how well Maggie was able to push through and accelerate through the end range, so the hardest part of the range. So I just asked her to do a partial squat rather than a full squat, and then coming up, and then just meeting a lot of resistance without really feeling what that's like initially. The third thing I wanted to do was to see if Maggie dropped into a lower squat, would the band just would unravel and probably potentially loop off of the barbell, causing, maybe a little bit of an accident to occur as well. So I could probably say that might happen if Maggie went into a full range deeper squat. The band might unravel maybe on one side or on 2 sides, and one, it might be just a bit of a disaster for us. So we're going to stick with partial squats, Maggie, okay? So there's nothing wrong with partial squats, okay? Partial squats are absolutely fine once we know why we use them. So partial squats are squats that generally go down to about a half range of a squat, and we use them to express more power and create more force at smaller ranges. So in this range here, okay? And that's really important for sprinting, for example, because in a sprint, you're in that position. You're in that very small knee bend and hip flexed position, okay? So partial squats are okay for those types of things to create maximum force to transfer, all right? So we're going to use some partial squats. What we're also going to do is we're going to add a little bit of resistance, okay? So we know that Maggie's 1RM is about 70 or 80 kilos. Maggie's lifting a 20 kilo bar plus 5 kilos of load on each side. So that's 30 kilos. So that's just not stimulating enough for Maggie, okay, to become more stronger but more powerful. So we're going to add a little bit of plate load as well. So Maggie, we're going to add on 5 kilos initially to each side. I think our 5s are over here. I'll grab collars as well off this one. You got them? Okay. If you want to put that on. Okay, so now we've added on another 10 kilos onto the bar. Okay, so we know now that the load is going to be 10 kilos plus the bar, it's 30 kilos, plus the 2 band is 5 kilos, so that's going to be up to 40 kilos now. Okay, so we'll see what that's like now with Maggie. So Maggie will do 4 reps of that partial squat. Again, we're looking at driving and accelerating nice and high up through the lift. So just take your time getting it steady. Yeah, explosive, as explosive as we can. And drive up, good. And at the top of these reps now, Maggie's meeting that 10 kilos of resistance that she has to push through. The bands now also are really safe because the size of the plate, we can rest there now, Maggie, because the size of the plate won't allow for the band to loop off. So you can rest the bar back there now, Maggie, you can rack it back up. Just nice and safe, that's it. And Maggie's technique was really good there. She was leaning into the band, or in against the band, in towards where the hooks were, so that there was no fear of her falling back. Okay, so that's really good. So Maggie was accelerating up into that resistance. Okay, so that's really, really important. Is that word intent? Okay, so when it comes to power training, intent is one of the main things that you should look for when you're coaching. How fast does the athlete want to do it at that time? So we all know that, jumping and plyometric exercises, cleans, accelerated lifts, and big, heavy strength exercises are really good for strength and power. However, it's those exercises coached well with a lot of intent from the athlete. So sometimes as a coach, you have to bring that intent. Okay, we're going to do one more set now where I'm going to coach Maggie really hard on her intent. I'm going to give her coaching cues that I want her to try and visualize and imagine so that she performs the exercise with the most intent possible, okay? So if we go back in now, Maggie, we're just going to do 3 reps, okay? So as soon as you hit that partial squat, okay, that half squat, I want you to imagine now you're a rocket and you're just flying straight upwards, okay? Breaking through the ceiling, okay? So imagine now you're that rocket. Don't drive it up. Good. Don't accelerate it up. Great. One more. Accelerate it up. Perfect. And we can walk it back in. Again, just that lean forward into the rack. Perfect. Okay. So that intent is one of the main things, again, that I want to impart on you today, is it's hugely important, okay? So I can try and observe Maggie doing that lift, and I can observe her doing all her sets and all of her reps, but I have to apply that intent to her sometimes as well. I have to give her the coaching cue, I have to paint an image in her head of what exactly I want to get out of this exercise, okay? And especially when we're using accommodating resistance or variable resistance, where we're meeting more and more load throughout the concentric, you have to have that intent to push through that extra resistance, Okay, have we any questions? No questions. If you have a question about that session, please put it down and we'll get to that. We'll just take a small 5-minute break now just to refresh. So go to the loo, go get a cup of tea or coffee, and we'll be back shortly for some blood flow resistance training. Okay, so thank you very much. Okay, so welcome back. I hope you're all refreshed and caffeinated. So for our actually, just before we go on, I suppose one question we had over the break was internally was how much load should the bands and chains apply, or should you apply to an exercise? Okay, so when we look at the bands and the chains, as you've seen from Maggie doing the banded back squat, we didn't apply a huge amount of load, so it wasn't 30 or 40 kilos of max tension of band resistance. We didn't do that, okay? We only applied a small load towards the latter part of the exercise. So as you see, when Maggie went down into the back squat, the band wasn't coming loose, was obviously a safety precaution, but also, you know, Maggie going down into the exercise and then driving up in and meeting that load immediately was another kind of thing that we had. The research and the literature will show you that when you're using bands and chains to apply, roughly speaking, about 10 to 20% of your 1 rep max load to that, okay? So if we look at the case of the bands, adding 10 kilos, Maggie's max back squat, we said, was in around the 70 to 80 mark, okay? So we know that adding 10 kilos to that is, you know, it's within that kind of 10 to 20% of her 1 rep max, okay? But as you can see, it didn't have a poor effect on her technique or on her execution of the exercise, okay? You can increase the load to be more than, you know, 15 to 20% of your 1 rep max. Just be careful that you're not exceeding to a large degree your total 1 rep max load, okay? So there are training programs, and you will see it prescribed whereby the max load at the top of the exercise will be about 101, 102% of your 1 rep max. So that when you get to the top, you're through your sticking point, you're through that tough bit, and you're just finishing out the exercise with a heavier load on your back than your 1 rep max, okay? So you will see that, but I would always advise caution against exceeding that 100% 1 rep max figure, okay? So that was just one thing I just wanted to clear up before we headed into the second session. So with the second session, we're looking at blood flow resistance training. We're looking at using tourniquet cuffs that we have here. I'll just grab one. So essentially, it's just a fancy strap made specifically for this purpose, okay? That goes through a little buckle, and we can tie the buckle, create a loop, and wrap it around a limb. So a little bit of background on the actual training itself. So you'll see it in many forms. It's called blood flow resistance training, KAATSU training. It's called like hypoxic training as well, or cuff training. So the reason why we do this, okay, is that what we want to do is we want to create a more hypoxic or anaerobic environment in the muscle, okay, and we want to get the blood in our system to be pooling in around that muscle, and to restrict the amount of blood leaving that muscle. So what we end up with visually is a huge pump effect, which we hopefully might see in a second when we do it with Maggie. You will see things like veins being a little bit maybe more enlarged looking as well, okay? So around the muscle, around that localized area, or maybe even into the hands, distal to the muscle. So what we want essentially from the exercise is to create that anaerobic or hypoxic environment. Okay, so why do we want to do that in the first place? Okay, so this method of training might seem quite extreme initially, but this has been used by many practitioners throughout the world to very good effect in most cases for elements of bodybuilding and hypertrophy type training, but also for rehabilitation training for people who can't exceed a certain level of load with their training. Okay, so we're going to look at 2 examples of an exercise, one for the upper body and one for the lower body. We're going to look at the bicep curl, and we're going to look at a heels elevated squat, just for a little bit more kind of biomechanical advantage as well on that. So what we want to see, or what we want to have happen, is that we're able to experience a little bit of a harder exercise relative to maybe the load that we're applying, or the exercise that we're applying. Okay, so Maggie's going to be using 6 kilos, and she's going to be doing a bodyweight squat, which is relatively easy for Maggie. Okay, but by applying this, she's hopefully going to stimulate what would have been maybe a more aerobic exercise into a more anaerobic exercise. So by using something like this, we're able to kind of trick the body, for want of a better term, that we're training harder than what we actually are. So this method of training has been used, as I said, by many physiotherapists, athletic therapists throughout the world, that you helping people who have injuries or injured limbs, that they can't maybe exceed a load. So for example, a lot of therapists would use some kind of tourniquet like this for very early stage rehabilitation of like ACL injuries in the knee, whereby they would wrap the tourniquet around the leg and be able to stimulate a hypoxic or anaerobic environment in the muscles of the thigh, okay? Because the knee might not be able to take a max load that we might be able to give it through a back squat. So we're able to replicate that higher load just through the use of a tourniquet, okay? So that's why this method of training might seem extreme, but it's actually not. There are a few things we need to know prior to using this, because there are some contraindications that you may or may not know. So any, say, heart condition, heart medication, any, say, chest tightness is a contraindication, and pregnancy would be a contraindication as well. So make sure that prior to using this method of training, as you would do with training anybody at any time anyway, you're ticking off your PAR-Q, your physical activity readiness questionnaire, and making sure that people are ready to train with you. Okay? So we're going to firstly get Maggie back in, and we're going to work on applying the tourniquet correctly. Okay? So there's a few things that we're looking at when we're looking at applying the tourniquet correctly. So Maggie, what you're going to do is you're going to stand over here. You're going to have your hand out like so. So I'm going to be wrapping the tourniquet around the more proximal side of the muscle that we're going to be targeting. So in this case, we're going to be doing bicep curls. So for the bicep runs in the upper arm here, on the inner part of the upper arm. So what we're looking to do, we have both a distal side, so which would be here, and we have a proximal side, which would be, say, up here towards the upper arm, okay? We wrap the tourniquet around the proximal side of the muscle, okay? Because the goal of it is to restrict the blood going back away from the muscle, okay, or away from the muscle, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap the tourniquet up. We're going to make sure that the buckle is in a position that is just comfortable for the athlete, okay? So, and the resistance that we're going to apply, and it's going to be for Maggie, okay, is going to be a 7 out of 10. So I'm going to ask Maggie, how does that feel? 3 out of 10. I'm going to pull it a little harder. How was that, Maggie? 5 out of 10. So we know that we're working up. How was that, Maggie? 6. A little bit more. 7. Okay. So we can clamp that down. Hopefully Maggie feels okay. We'll ask Maggie to just do a few kind of light movements with her arm. Does it feel comfortable? Perfect. So what we're going to do then is we're just going to wait a little bit, okay? Because we're not going to rush into the exercise immediately. We just need to know what effect the tourniquet is having on Maggie, okay? There's a few ways for us to know that. The first thing, before you do anything, is to just see if there's any discoloration or coldness in the hand that you've just applied the tourniquet to. So, Maggie, if we put out our 2 hands, the backs of the hands, and I can have a quick look. Okay, so is there any discoloration there, do you think? No. Okay, so Maggie's confident. She knows her hands better than I know her hands, okay? All right, so we're going to apply the other tourniquet now as well. to the other side because we're going to be doing a dual dumbbell. And again, we're just using that kind of RPE gauge of 1 to 10 to know how tight this is for Maggie. Tighter. Tighter again. Oh, slipped a bit. Up there. Okay, so we're just going to clamp that back down. And again, we're just going to just sporadically check Maggie's hands. We'll check on the first one here again. So we'll just have a quick look at the hands. Okay, perfect. All right. So, Maggie, you've two 6-kilo dumbbells. So our protocol for using blood flow resistance training is kind of similar enough for most hypertrophy-based protocols, okay? So she's going to do a couple of sets, 3, 4, maybe up to 5 sets. She's going to do a hypertrophy range repetition, so she's going to go for about 8 to 12. We're going to use a load that is somewhat stimulating, okay? So it's not 1 kilo that it's too light that she doesn't get any stimulation, but it's not 20 kilos that she can't lift it as well. We still want her to hit that hypertrophy range. We're going to give her a short period of break in between each set, about 30 seconds, maybe to a minute, depending on how she's feeling, and then we're going to go back in. We're not going to go to volitional failure or muscle failure. We're just going to go to until she feels as if the muscle is working and burning, and that's going to add on to the subsequent sets. All right, so Maggie, I want you to do a supinated dumbbell bicep curl, and we'll aim for 10 reps, okay? That's it, and make sure we get like the full lockout down there now. That's it. Perfect. And as with every exercise, we're just watching our technique. Is there anything that we can change, we can tweak? So as I said there, you've seen that I coached Maggie into a supinated hand position, just to expose and externally rotate the shoulder, and hopefully put the bicep under a bit more mechanical advantage position for it. Good. All okay? And we can just rest the dumbbells down. And we just time 30 seconds, okay? I'll time 30 seconds here now. So again, we're just using the time now to just assess Maggie's hands. Make sure it's not they're not too discolored. They look fine. There's no tingling in your hands? No. Perfect, okay. So she feels as if they're about kind of a 7 out of 10 tightness, which is good. But there's no discoloration, which is good as well. I would imagine 1 in every 3 times you do this, you're going to have to readjust, okay? That's just my experience with it. Every third person either ties them too tight, or perhaps I tie them too tight, because people will just have different rates of perceived tightness, okay? Right, so let's go back into this again. 40 seconds, you got an extra 10 seconds rest, okay. Off we go, let's go 10 reps again. That's it, nice and smooth. Keeping the body nice and still, so we're just localizing it now to the bicep, just an elbow flexion exercise, okay? Good. Maggie's starting to kind of not struggle, but you can tell that she's moving now, and it is a tough exercise for her. Okay. Good, and we can rest there now, Maggie. We'll put it back down. We'll take another 30 seconds. So, how does it feel?
I found that one a little tougher.
Perfect.
To the end of the reps.
Great. Tell me how the bicep feels at the muscle itself.
No, that's kind of okay. Yeah. Feel it a little bit. It feels nearly stronger.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
She's getting stronger. Okay. Okay. So we'll do one more set. Okay, just to see kind of where we are, and then we'll take the tourniquets off. So we leave the tourniquets on for the entirety of the sets and the reps. Okay, and then we take them off. Right. So let's go one more. Right, so just nice and steady now, keeping the body rigid. That's it. Good, we might get 2 more. That's it. So just push Maggie on a small bit, just last set, you can squeeze out a couple more. There we go. And an extra one, cool. All right, so we can put them down. Perfect, okay, so I'm gonna give you a hand taking them off. All right, so just unclip them. How does that feel?
Yeah, no, it's good.
It's fine?
Yeah, you can feel it.
So you can feel it. So she should get like a little sense of like, a bit of relief into the arm, but not overbearing, as we said, okay?
You feel like you're stimulating the muscle more though.
Yeah? Cool. So she said that she felt like she was stimulating the muscle a little bit more, okay? So just to recap on why we would use this type of training, and then we look at the lower body, just give Maggie a little bit of a break for a moment, is we are able to use less load in a safer fashion or a safer way than putting, say, for example, if Maggie had an elbow injury, okay, and wasn't able to do, say, for example, a chin-up. That is a big strength exercise for most coaches. She could apply tourniquets and do bicep curls and get a decent level of stimulation into that arm, okay? Without having to go through maybe a severe amount of shoulder or elbow flexion that might harm her, okay? If she had an injury or something like that, okay? Right, Maggie, we ready to go again? Okay, so we're going to do the lower body now. So Maggie, you're going to self-tighten these yourself because your arms now are free to work. So again, we're just looking at a 7 out of 10, going right up into the upper leg if we can, just about there. Yeah, perfect. So tighten it nice and hard now. Get a good pull on that now, and again, make sure that it should be constricting the leg, okay? It should be constricting the leg to the point whereby, you know, it does feel tough, okay? So, as I said, you can always, if you start to get a little bit tingly or any kind of loss of color, obviously in your hands or in your feet, then that's a good sign that you can kind of just loosen it again, okay? So, just tightening it once doesn't mean that you have to leave it. So, for this one now, what we're going to look at is a closed chain exercise. So we're going to use a squat, okay? Oftentimes you'll see tourniquets for the lower body being used on leg extension, leg curl machines, maybe a leg press machine. We're just going to use a closed chain exercise. We're going to use a heels elevated squat, okay? So Maggie's a pretty decent squatter anyway. But when we use a heels elevated squat, we can get Maggie to go through a little bit more range of motion and hopefully stimulate that quad muscle even more. Right, so Maggie, do they feel about a 7 out of 10?
Yeah.
Great. So if we want to, just put your heels, see it on the 15 kilo plate behind. So we're going to, yeah. So heels elevated. I just want you to just go into a squat as comfortable as you want and then back up out of it. Feels easy?
Yeah, easy.
Perfect, okay. So as we said, Maggie now can squat. Her squat strength is about 70 to 80 kilos, I would say. So doing a bodyweight squat is very easy, all right? So we might have to add additional load to her just to get a little bit more stimulation, okay? So Maggie, let's just do one bodyweight set. Let's do 15 reps, okay? So we go a little bit higher on the reps, and let's see what we feel like. Good. We can use a tempo as well when Maggie's doing this, okay? So we can say, you know, a 3-second eccentric with a 1-second concentric or a fast concentric. You can play around with this as well. It's not, what I'm doing here is not like the way to do it. It is a way to do it. Good. Good, just get maybe one more now. Great, and you can just step off, take a little break, 30 seconds. How does that feel?
Good job.
Do we need to make any adjustments, do you think? Are you okay? Okay. The leg is a little bit different to the upper arm in the sense that when Maggie goes into her squat, her thigh is going to expand as she goes down, okay? Due to the contraction of her hamstrings, her glutes, her quads, all of those muscles. So when she comes out of the first set, she might feel as if the band isn't tight enough. She might have to try and tighten it again, as you'll see, okay? So that is okay if you do need to tighten it again, but it's not a huge factor. We might get a dumbbell and go for like a goblet, position, okay? So if you're able to lift about 80 kilos, I think a 15 or 17 should be pretty okay for you. Okay, so just into the goblet pose. You got it? And we're going to ask her to do a little bit of a tempo. So this time now, we're going to go for down for 2 seconds. So it's 1, 2, and then straight up. 1, 2, straight up. 1, 2, straight up. So we're just playing around with a lot of different mechanisms here now for hypertrophy training. So we're using a bit of mechanical advantage. We're using the tourniquets, obviously, but we're also using a tempo, so we're increasing the time under tension for Maggie. Good, that's it. Make sure we're not bouncing out of the bottom now, so make sure it's just smooth, stop, up. That's it. So we don't really want, you heard what I was saying there, you don't want Maggie to be using like the stretch shortening cycle, so we might even add her in the next set to add a pause in, okay? So let's get one more. Always do one more, okay? So we can just let the dumbbell down safely. If in doubt, do one more. If still in doubt, do another 2. That's the way we work. Okay, Maggie, how is that feeling?
Good, yeah, you just have to adjust them every time, right?
Yeah, so Maggie said we just have to adjust them every time, and that's fine because they'll slide, especially, you know, using gym pants or shorts. You know, the shorts can kind of, and the pants can kind of slide over the material as well. As for the tourniquets themselves, there's different tourniquets on the market specifically built for this. We're not endorsing any particular brand, but you know, a good pair of tourniquets for this helps, okay? So rather than using cord or rope or something like that, there are specifically built ones that we would advise that you use, okay? So this time, Maggie, we're going to get that dumbbell up again. We'll do one more set, but this time we're going to add a pause into the bottom, okay? So it's 1, 2 down, pause, and then up, okay? 1, 2, pause, and then up, okay? So it's just a little bit of pause at the bottom. 1, 2, pause, up. Good. That's it, and drive up nice and quick then on the up. 1, 2, pause, up. That's it. 1, 2, pause, and up. Good. 1, 2, pause, up. Good, and go again. 1, 2, pause, up. We have 2 more to do now. 1, 2, pause, up. Good, a little bit tough now for her. Last one. 1, 2, pause, and up. Cool, and we can just step off, and we can leave the dumbbell down safely, and you can just unclip the tourniquets then on the last set. Great, okay. So that's a tough exercise now, okay? Not to mention tougher when you're wearing a mask and doing it as well. So a lot of Maggie's pain there was masked for you, okay? But we know that she was working hard. Okay, so when we look at that exercise, we can see that there's a few small little different things, like with most exercises, that just need constant adjustment. So the tourniquets need adjustment, your communication with the athlete needs adjustment, and also the exercise needs adjustment as well. Okay, so it's kind of like baking a cake. Okay, so you need to change the dial on the oven, you need to add more flour, you need to add a bit more milk, you need to whisk it up a bit more, whatever you need to do, okay, to make the perfect cake. And it's the same for a particular exercise or a set or even a session, okay? There's small things that you need to do throughout the exercise just to make sure that you're getting the most out of it for the athlete, okay? That you're pushing them into the zone of not it being too easy and not it being too hard, but in the zone of just kind of that Goldilocks zone of just right, okay? So that concludes our blood flow resistance training section, okay? So if you have any questions, either from the chain or the band exercises that we've done, or from the blood flow resistance training that we've done, then please send them up into the chat box and we'll get to them. We might leave maybe 2 or 3 minutes there for people to type messages, and then we can respond, okay? So we'll be back on there if there's another message. If there's not, I hope that you're doing all well and that you're continuing your learning about strength and fitness. It's a perfect time to do so, and I would implore everybody just to keep reaching out, keep learning, keep doing the best you can, and hopefully we'll be back in the gyms doing our best work soon. Okay, so for me and all the people here, I'd like to thank you for tuning on today. So stay safe, and we hope to chat soon. Thank you.